Good afternoon. I'm Rona Free. I'm the Vice President of Academic Affairs at Eastern, and it's a pleasure for me to welcome all of you to the 2010 Eastern Fellows Program. This is a program that was started in 2008 to bring back to campus some of our most distinguished and accomplished alumni, so that our current students can hear about their experiences, get a little bit of advice from them, and get inspiration and confidence as they move to graduation and enter their careers. We have three extraordinarily accomplished individuals who are the members of the 2010 class of Eastern Fellows. So what I'm going to do is just introduce each of them very briefly. In the program on your seats, you have more detailed biographies. The first question that they're going to answer will relate to their experiences, so I won't waste too much of your time introducing them. I want them to get as much time as possible to talk to you. So they'll answer a few questions, and then I think we'll have time for your questions afterwards. So first, immediately to my right, we have Brett Harnett, who graduated in 1984. He's currently a research assistant professor and associate director of the Center for Surgical Innovation and the Department of Surgery at the University of Cincinnati. To Brett's right is Kathleen Weidman, who graduated in 1979 with a bachelor's degree in economics. Kathleen is currently president of Bright Systems, a company that specializes in preserving and retrieving large-scale electronic files. And then on the end is Jeffrey Brown, who graduated in 1979 with a bachelor's degree in public policy and government. He's currently the chief administrative officer for Webster Bank and Webster Financial Corporation. So what we're going to do is start off with having each of them answer a question about their career path. So what I'd like to do is ask each of them to discuss your career path after graduating from Eastern, and also maybe a little bit about your educational background that you had as you moved to graduating. Feel free to mention any mentors who you may have met at Eastern or elsewhere who played a significant role in your career. So let's start with Brett.
Good afternoon. I'm happy to be here. Thanks for coming and listening to some of our background share with you. I graduated in 1984, and shortly after that I began a series of career advancements, so to speak, in the areas of real estate appraising, got into publishing, did some consulting work. As a business graduate, I focused on finance and economics, so I thought that was kind of the direction I was going. As I got a little further, a couple more years down the road, I began to fall in love with technology, and noticed that there was a lot of attention being paid to technology, a lot of good reasons to be involved in technology, and that's kind of where I gravitated towards. In 1996, I was working at an advertising agency, and I had an opportunity to interview at Yale University as a programmer analyst. So I took that opportunity, interviewed at Yale University, and the physician that interviewed me actually knew about Eastern Connecticut State University, and he didn't go there, but he had friends who had gone here, so we immediately struck a chord with him at that point. But I was hired as a program analyst at Yale. I spent some time there working in what we call telemedicine, telehealth might be a more contemporary term for it. But one of my mentors there was Dr. Ronald Merrill. He was a consultant to NASA. And during the time I was there, they began to develop a medical informatics program out of Virginia to look at how we could monitor astronauts during space flight, the medical telemetry, how we deal with instances of applications in space, whether it be hardware or software or both. And in 1999, I was asked to take a position down in Virginia at the NASA medical program. That's where things really started to get interesting. And I traveled around the world. I worked as a scientist designing programs, what we call test beds. We call them test beds, things we really couldn't do in the United States. because of too many laws where in some of these foreign countries, they needed help. And it was, you could almost say it was somewhat relief work, and one of the programs I was involved in was a program in Kosovo after the war, building a medical infrastructure out after the Serbians had been removed from the southern part of Slovakia. So during those periods of time, I started to really grasp a larger perspective as to where technology was going, and I kept falling back to ECSU as in terms of strategic thinking, creativity, articulation, being able to get points across, being able to convey at very high levels, even with government personnel in different countries, challenging environment, not to mention the language barriers. From there, I left and was offered a job at University of Cincinnati as an assistant professor with the Center for Surgical Innovation, basically taking my efforts from space-based platform to a terrestrial platform, where now I sit, and with all of these issues with healthcare being battled around in Washington, it's a very interesting time for people in my industry in terms of technology, data interchange, and basically it's a very big problem that needs to be addressed at a national level, and our healthcare is going to require a lot of attention. So I am proud to be here today. I'm happy to answer any questions. I look forward to hearing from my colleagues to my right, because they've got equally impressive and exciting backgrounds. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Kathy Weidman. I have actually an interesting story, I think, from Eastern days. I actually came here. Eastern was my backup school. I didn't actually want to come to Eastern, believe it or not. I thought I was going to other colleges that had great reputations and what have you, and I ended up, mainly because of financial concerns, is coming to Eastern, and thought, okay, I can't wait to get out of here, and this is just not what I want to do. I came my freshman year. I started as a psychology major, of all things. I ended up dropping out of school. And then I worked in a factory for a while, thinking that's what I wanted to do, but realized pretty quickly that school was the only option. And because of, again, financial concerns, I came back to Eastern. But I realized that I don't have enough money to graduate, so I had to make up for my lost semester. So I ended up taking extra courses and graduating on time with my class. But I started, as I mentioned, in psychology, found that, no, I like finance, I'll go there. No, I like English, maybe I'll be an English major. And so, the one thing I would like to say is, as far as an education, I would say that the diversity of what I did, from learning about psychology to English, whatever, everything has really served me well to understanding how to run companies. So my field really is in fixing broken things, I would guess is the best way to put it. I specialize in the media and entertainment business. I've worked out in Hollywood, I've run post-production facilities, broadcasting companies and what have you. So I work with the Pixars and the delivery of entertainment kind of industry. When I started out of Eastern, as I mentioned, I loved economics. To me, it just clicked. Dr. Parzik and Dr. Lombard, who have now retired, were really instrumental in my life, at least, in terms of motivating me and understanding my potential. And for whatever reason, economics just clicked with me, and that's why I ended up focusing on that. But I will say that it's also served me well in terms of really understanding how companies work, how the microeconomic parts of the world work, as well as the macroeconomics, and how your particular industry might fall into what's going on in the global economy. So a real core understanding of that was really instrumental. When I started, basically, I would say a lot of my career was I started in finance, and then I just started looking around and trying different things and understanding where my flow was. I started at a large company, and I learned about mergers and acquisitions. That ended up resulting in a position with a company that ultimately went bankrupt, but we brought it through a Chapter 11. It was an international company. We ended up selling it. when it was done and everything was settled and I was ecstatic that we were able to be successful, life just got really boring for me, and I realized it wasn't the getting fixed I like, it was doing the process of fixing. So I focused on companies that were struggling, companies that either had high growth or financial difficulties or cash problems or direction or organizational issues, and basically going in, doing immersion transition management. So I've been now CEO of 10 companies, bringing them through everything from a Chapter 11 reorganization to an acquisition, or even acquiring other companies. I love what I do, so I always tell people that if you, and it's a cliche maybe, but if you enjoy what you do, it's never work. So, I have to say I've really had a great, interesting career that's brought me around the world, but it's also taught me a lot about people and managing difficult situations and persevering when you think all is lost, to keep focusing on the goal. So anyway, so I'm glad to be here. It's been a long time. Some of these faces look familiar, but not the buildings, that's for sure. So we broke in a lot of these buildings. I don't mean breaking in, I mean.
It's a story for another day.
That's how I really started my career, fixing broken things. But no, I think to me it's amazing what Eastern has been through, but the basis of this education, or the foundation that I was able to gain here, being in a college that I really didn't think was right for me, and I was just amazed at the quality of the teachers, the passion and commitment to the people here. Really result in it. And to this day, I'm really glad I never had the money to go to some of those other colleges. This was a really unbelievable experience for me and served me well to prepare me for the future. So, thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Jeff Brown, and was certainly introduced earlier. It is a very surreal experience to be back. I think the last time, Kathy and I haven't seen each other since we graduated in 1979, just as we're breaking into buildings. This, actually, where we are today, this was the soccer field at that point. The soccer coach was Coach Nevers. I understand now there's a soccer field that's named after Coach Nevers. Half the buildings around the campus that are new since we've been here are named after people that were here. But it's weird. We just had this lovely lunch with your president and senior administrative officials. Ken Bedini was there. He was my RA when I was in the high-rise. That's a whole other story. Talk about breaking into buildings. But, my career, I like to say, did start here at Eastern, and it did have a lasting impression. I came here because this is where you went when you were going to be a teacher. And you picked one of the 4 state colleges based on where you lived, and that was the practical reality of the situation. It wasn't shortly after I was here that I really discovered this passion and interest in public policy and government and politics, and we were just in the transitioning from a teacher's college to more of a liberal arts education, and so I decided to switch from education to public policy and government. I did also realize at the time that it would be helpful if I had something to fall back on and that I could actually eat, so I did a minor in business and communications. Warren Kimbrough was the Assistant Dean of Student Affairs at the time. I know he's long since gone. He just passed away a couple of years ago, and he had a great impact on my life in helping me think about how I looked at life itself and what are some of the things that I wanted to do. He introduced me to the head of career planning and placement here, who had a friend at this bank in Hartford. At that time, it was Hartford National Bank. It was a prominent bank in its day, based in Hartford. I had no interest in being a banker, and I still like to tell people that when I grow up, I'm going to figure out what I really want to do. But banking, for the meantime, will certainly fit the bill. I started as a management trainee, which is where they put all the folks who had a liberal education background, and I was put out into the branches for my first year, and I realized that really was not, there was something about it that just wasn't for me. We kept getting these memos from Hartford that were telling us what to do, and I'd always ask a lot of questions when that would happen, and it suddenly occurred to me that I really wanted to be the guy writing those memos, not the guy receiving the memos. So I transferred to the main office and settled within the marketing department and developed kind of a self-taught, but within the institution an expertise in product management. And then I rotated around through a number of different product management groups, all of within the marketing context. Hartford National was a very successful bank. They bought Connecticut National down in Fairfield County and realized the Hartford National name doesn't travel too well. So we had the brilliant idea, well, we'll change the name of the new company to Connecticut National. Good, till we bought a bank in Boston. We bought Shawmut Bank in Boston, changed our name to Shawmut, and I was there for a good long period of time commuting back and forth between Hartford and Boston, but all the way during this period developing this expertise in marketing, which actually comprised a lot of the things that I had learned in both business administration, as well as the minor in communications, as well as the stuff in public policy. While I didn't study psychology while I was here, there's obviously a lot of psychology behind that. And ultimately, I was recruited away from Shawmut to join the Fleet Financial Group. Now, Fleet at that time was one of the top 10 banks in the country, and I had moved to Providence and split my time again between Providence and Boston. Again, within the context of marketing, and here I had the opportunity to move from product management and run all the other aspects of marketing, whether it's advertising, research, and the different components. I was the director of sales and a number of different responsibilities. Long story short, I got the call from a recruiter one day from this little bank in Waterbury, Connecticut, that quite honestly I had never heard of before. And I was a little too full of myself and said, thanks, but no thanks. I've got a good job. I'm really getting a lot of good stuff here. And the recruiter just said, give the CEO 45 minutes. That's all we ask. Just give him 45 minutes and we'll see. And the long story short, I believed in what he was trying to do. I thought that there were a lot of issues with banks that you can now see readily available in the marketplace today, but that it was possible for a bank to build a customer-centric environment, which of course is what we're all about in marketing, and to make that a reality in a very successful enterprise in a rapidly changing industry that had been deregulated. And the significance of that is that quite honestly, in a regulated industry, it's pretty hard to screw up. The government tells you pretty much all the things that you're going to do. I used to come in the morning and I'd call the Federal Reserve and they'd tell me what we were going to pay in interest rates for that week. And so I'd post it and we'd broadcast it out, and that was about as sophisticated as our pricing gets. When you have deregulation, a lot of the burden falls back, and you think about the changes that have occurred in the banking industry. When I started, and I'm not that old, although we may look at a few gray hairs, there were almost 20,000 banks in the United States. There are now 6,000 banks in the United States, and that's all principally as a result of both deregulation and the fact that there were a lot of management teams that couldn't make the transition. And so marketing was a very important component for a lot of banks that were trying to make that transition and figure out what was going on. But in the middle of all this, I became the marketing director for Webster Bank now about 14 years ago, and about 5 years into it, our chief information officer had left quite suddenly. And we were struggling with what were we going to do in terms of running this, a critical function for a bank in the period where we were looking for a new individual to run that group, because none of the individuals within that group were perceived strong enough to assume the leadership position. So I had the harebrained idea of, well, I'll go out there, for a couple of months and just babysit it while we do the search and look. And search took a little longer than we thought. I actually ended up running it for about a year, and ultimately that led to my assuming the responsibilities that I have today, which is for pretty much all of the backroom functions, IT operations, and the list existed before. It's very different from where I began. It has a tremendous opportunity for me to find passion in some of the different things that I do. And I think, one of the things that we'll come back to later on is the importance of making some of those transitions and being open to some of those opportunities.
Thank you. Well, what I'd like each of you to address for a minute or two next is, given that we are Connecticut's public liberal arts college, we require that students take a lot of courses outside of their disciplines. And so I'm wondering if you could talk for a few minutes about, first of all, from your perspective as individuals who didn't necessarily take a direct career path. You tried a number of different disciplines and different occupations. And also in terms of what you look for in young people who you might hire in your businesses now. How do you evaluate a student's academic experience in terms of, well, this student hasn't taken enough courses in accounting or enough courses in finance. They've taken a lot of courses in English and history, and that's nice, but it's not really what they need to know in my business. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about, from your own perspective, how taking courses outside your discipline helped, and then also in terms of what you look for in students nowadays. So if we could start with Mr. Harnett again.
That's a lot of questions.
Sorry.
Okay, so let me back up a little bit by saying I think arriving at ECSU was somewhat serendipitous for me. This was my third undergraduate college. I had started in aviation science. I then transferred to Manchester Community Technical College for some personal reasons, and then I landed here. And I can't say exactly how I ended up here, other than the fact that the liberal arts program had what I needed. And where I was at that point in my life was a lot of confusion. I wanted to be a pilot. I thought I'd get into technology, and then I thought I would, cover both expanses or broaden myself even more. So I ended up at ECSU, and my college career here was very, I'll say, unsocial. I'm not antisocial. I was unsocial because all I did was work. I worked, I went to school, and so you talk about not remembering some of the buildings around here. The only place I remember is the racquetball court in the library, because that was where my focus was. I just worked and wanted to get my degree and move on. So I landed here, but what Eastern taught me was to kind of have greater perspective. Is to look at my earlier, when I first got into college, where I was a little unfocused, a little unbridled, had some personal issues, but by the time I got here, it all started to come together. And that kind of set me on the right path into the direction that I ended up going. And I didn't really know the direction I was going. As I mentioned, eventually I sort of geared toward technology. But you don't necessarily know where your career path may end you up in. Now, some of you may be fortunate enough to do that, and that's fine. But if not, you have to have a well-rounded background. You have to have perspective. And I think what Eastern did for me was give me that perspective and put into a container, kind of what I had learned to date, and I was able to package myself. I was able to interview well. You talk about what I would look for in hiring someone, for example, and I would have to say that's passion. Knowledge at a young age when you just get out of college is academic. It's academic. You have no expertise to back it up. You have no experience to rest on your laurels. You've got to get out there, and you have got to have drive, and you have to have passion. So when I talk to people, I look in their eyes, and I look at how they feel, how they speak about the organization, about the industry they're in, about their personal experiences. And I have to say, I look at, to some degree, the level of articulation, how well someone speaks, and how much background check have they done in this particular industry. Impress me with something. Tell me something I don't know, and you've impressed me. Because there's a lot of things I don't know, so it should be a hard thing. So these people that we talk to now have to have that broad perspective and passion and drive. And I think that because you don't have experience, you really need things like that. And I believe that this liberal arts college can help give you those tools that you need to successfully press ahead in your career. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Weidman?
Well, as I mentioned before, I started in psychology and English. It was another passion. I thought I wanted to be an English major and a writer. I will say that the diversity of courses that I took, while there were some that I loved, and I thought, well, that's what I want to do. But more importantly, I think there were a lot of courses I took and realized that's absolutely not what I want to do. I took programming as an example. That was the worst semester of my life, I think. I just couldn't get it. I didn't understand it. But for every course I took, there's a bit of me that, or a bit of the course that came with me later on. So I like to say now, as someone who's sort of a professional president or CEO, I always tell people I'm almost like say an orchestra leader, but I don't know how to play any of the instruments. So there are people who clearly in their, in very specific professions, perhaps accounting or maybe engineering or certainly medical or legal or what have you. You do have to have a very solid, specific course offering. But if you want to be an orchestra leader, you don't really know how to, you have to know how to play all the instruments. It's just a matter of bringing in how to motivate people, how to drive strategy, how to get the best out of people, how to communicate. So, you find that with a liberal arts background, as well as, specific courses in what you do, I think for me, something that was very important for me to go and get an MBA. I think that anyone that's ever asked me, I think it's very important to go and continue your education regardless of what profession you're in. You can never stop learning. I find as well that I'm constantly reading and learning about ways people are communicating. The world changes in terms of what's out there, particularly in the field I'm in with media and entertainment, as you can see, with Avatar. I mean, Avatar revolutionized the way that movies will be done and pictures and stories will be told. So it's important to understand, well, how did that happen and what's the technology that goes into it? But I can tell you that, particularly in the media and entertainment industry, there's very few people that actually studied how to be a movie star or how to be an editor or a sound engineer or what have you. They had very diverse backgrounds and then found editing and found colorist positions and found what they love. So I think it's important, like I said, find out what you love to do, but find out what you really don't like to do by taking courses that may be a stretch for you. In terms of what I look for, I have to agree, I look for passion as well. If someone is coming straight out of college and looking for a job, I want to know not what the grade point average is necessarily or what courses they took, but what else did they do with their lives? Did they raise a younger child, the little sister? Did they come from a single family home? Did they overcome some sort of adversity? Did they put themselves through college? Did they join in clubs? Were they a leader in their, in college? So, and that to me shows commitment. Sometimes it can be an athlete. To me, my son was an athlete, a very dedicated athlete, and I knew the commitment and passion it took to focus on that while going to school. So, what I would say is that it's not just about going to the courses and getting a, great grade. It's about what else you're doing with your life and the interests you take. Thank you.
Thank you.
Kathy made me think about the fact, I run a major IT organization as part of my responsibilities at Webster. The full extent of my background from an academic perspective in information technology was a Fortran class that I took at a building next door here, where in order to run our programs, we had to punch cards and leave them to be run through the computer that night and then show up the next day and pick up the output that you had. Now I've got more processing power in my iPhone than we had in the whole mainframe that ran the campus at this time. The point of which is that, the full and true relevance of that academic work that I did to what I do today wasn't as essential as the overarching kind of understanding that I developed of information technology and how it flows. I think very consistent with what you've heard before, I look for passion and I look for diversity. And I think that, you want to see somebody who is passionate about what they do. You want to see in their resume that they have a breadth of interests, because no matter what it is that there's an interesting thing that having responsibility for HR, I spent a lot of time thinking about organizational design. And organizational design always comes down to, you'll never have the perfect organization. You have to develop an organization that meets the multitude of needs, but you're always going to create some area of gray. And that gray area, which is not fully defined between two respective departments, 9 times out of 10 will ultimately prove to be a weakness. Or it will prove to be the opportunity that somebody else leverages to make that next innovation or leapfrog, because they're going beyond the traditional. So it's always, I'm looking for people who are kind of comfortable and looking at that gray space and willing to play in that environment. Now, I'll give you a very pragmatic and practical, if you want just some sheer, if you want to get a job with me, show up and make me believe that you'll want it. I always tell people and give the advice that if you're going on a job interview, you have one objective. That's to get a call back. You're in sell mode. Worry about whether or not you want the job after it's offered. You can't turn down a job you're not offered. And I can't tell you how many people have never made it past the first interview with me because they play that, well, geez, tell me about the bank and why I should want to work here. I'm like, okay, go talk to somebody else. I don't have time for that. So when you show up to play, show up to win. And it's part of, it's that passion and that drive that we're looking for. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'd like to start down at the opposite end with Mr. Brown on the next question. I think one of the things that's most challenging for students when they're just about to graduate from college, if they're not going to go immediately to graduate school and if they want to get into a business, is how do you get into that industry? So what I'd like for you to talk about now is if a student is graduating and wants to go to work right away, even though we realize that for many of them they will have to go back to graduate school, how do they break into your industry? I assume it's no longer just responding to newspaper ads.
No, I think that's true. There's a couple of things that you certainly want to understand, and not everyone does when they graduate college. What is that passion? What is it you want to be? Do you really know what do you want to be your life's work? I'll be perfectly honest. When I graduated, I didn't. I thought I did. And I accidentally tripped into this path that has ended up being a very good career path for me. But you have to find something in which you are passionate about, as we were just saying, and find different ways in which to leverage that passion. If you're going through and you're still earlier in your career here, internships and different things of that nature, find different ways to stand out from the crowd. And then, the other thing, and here's kind of a dichotomy in the market that I don't fully understand, because, I was saying at a class this morning, the likelihood that you're going to retire for the first company you join is next to nil. That's just not the marketplace out there today. The same token, I'll tell you that many truly great companies do most of their promotions from within. So if you want a good career with a Disney organization, for example, you want to get in early, not later on. So it's either find that passion in an industry or find a passion for a particular company, and then find things that it's going to be appealing to them to get that wedge in the door, whether it's an internship or different programs that you do. Internships is probably the most practical, but as a result, it's also the most highly sought after by other individuals. And I'll leave. I know what Kathy's going to say next, so I'll leave that point to her.
Well, I deal a lot with interviewing people, particularly kids coming out of college, and I have to say that there is a secret to getting a job. Network, network, network. The traditional ways of finding a job now are gone. I would say that even though you've got Monster and all of that, all those you may get a job off of that, but I'll guarantee you that probably 1 out of 10 resumes that you send in, you probably won't even get a response, not even electronic, thank you very much, and we'll throw you in the database. The best way to get a job is through a human contact. So if that means, think about your neighbors, your teachers, use your career counseling services. I always say to people, get on LinkedIn and link with people. And and then in the beginning of your career, I would say, like I did. I mean, in the beginning, I wanted to be an economist. Well, the world economists weren't calling me to work for them, so I ended up having to go and I joined Wang Laboratories at the time, which was growing tremendously. But I processed expense reports. I couldn't have been more bored in my life. I said, I'm built for something bigger than this. But I did that job well, and every time I'd finish that job, I'd look to go into other areas of the business just to learn, and ended up in the mergers and acquisitions group eventually. So I would say that, trying to get in has to be, or should be, through human contact. You might be lucky and get a response off, the job boards, but, I would say that if you know someone and get that interview, like Jeff said, the first thing is getting the interview. The second is getting the call back. And then the third, by that time, you're still in a pool of 20 people. And it's a definite, it's a changed world right now because it's so open. The good news about the job boards and all of the online job search things is that you know about every job. But the bad news is, so does everyone else. So when we I never, ever, ever hire through a recruiter, and I never hire through a job board. I don't post jobs. I get jobs and from people I know. So I would say, again, and I know more executives that do that regularly. So most of the jobs are not, not on the job board. And, and if somebody knows you and you follow up and you're passionate about it, then, it comes through in the interview. Now, one thing, I have just an interesting little practical story again, but I was, as part of my consulting, I meet with ex-executives and things because I figure they'll land and I'll get my next jobs through those. That's when I was doing consulting full-time. So I joined this executive forum thing, and these are all these poor, sad, older executives, sorry, I'm one of those now, but who are unemployed and looking for jobs. And so as part of this whole roundtable, we exchanged communication and what have you, and they'd complain, and I can't find a job anywhere, and nobody's responding, et cetera. Well, eventually, I took I took this position that I have now, and I was looking for executives. Not one person got in touch with me from that executive seminar, and I know most of them are still looking for jobs. Now, some very, very talented people, but I would never go out and look for them because I realized, well, they don't have the passion. They don't have the, the commitment to go out and, reach out and come and talk and say, hey, what's going on? I'd love to talk to you about that. So, it's just a really good example. Now, these poor people are still out of work, but, I've since hired people who have contacted me and said, I really want to work there. I think I can offer something for that company. So, I can't stress enough, network. Use your fellow students, your teachers, your neighbors, your bankers, and you will see it will be a lot easier for you. And don't waste your time sending hundreds of resumes out over the internet. You'll be lucky to get a response from it.
I have to agree with the networking part wholeheartedly. So the classic conundrum, how do you get experience without a job, and how do you get a job without experience? So some of my advice would be, first of all, start small but think big. You're not going to come out of college and get a big position. But if you think, if you have a path in mind, even if the industry changes, your career path focus changes, at least you have developed a plan. So go in without, take a position that is not exactly what you're looking for if you're offered one. You can grow from there, show them what you're made of. You can then work through these networking groups that Kathy mentioned, take additional classes. The importance of a secondary education, I believe, is important, and I can tell you personally that when I graduated here in 1984, I didn't finish my master's program until 2007, because I was burned out from school. But it has, in the last few years, it's already paid off handsomely for me, because some of the things I'm working in now are directly attributable to the knowledge domain that I had acquired in my master's program. The master's program is not easy, especially when you're my age and you have a family. So in my industry, I'm in healthcare technology, and the government just, says, we're going to throw $20 billion of your tax dollars towards information technology to help get the healthcare system back on its feet. So these types of applications that are specific to healthcare, and there's a lot of them. You can work through these networking opportunities. You can do specialized certifications that don't take that much effort. Continue to send out letters, and like Kathy says, you have to be specific about how you do that. But I think these types of activities, and with that passion and that drive, you can show that you are going to be a little more of a better candidate than the next person. I have a 15-year-old son, and I'm trying to train him about doing 110%, because there's a lot of people out there doing 100%. Sometimes even less. But if you want to stand out, if you want to get attention, if you want to be that chosen one, then you better be demonstrating at least 110% in what you do. And that may be going beyond the norm, doing special things, getting attention. Tiger Woods or any other professional golfer did not get to where they are because they just gave 100%. they gave 110%, 120%. Set your goals high, but don't start too high. Thank you.
Thank you. I have lots of other questions I could ask, but we only have about 10 more minutes, and so I'd like to see if there are any questions from people in the audience. Any questions? Yeah, right?
I forgot your name, sir. Yes.
Brett.
You and I are around the same age. I'm currently looking for full-time. How does my age go against me in today's market with college degrees?
You have got experience. So what you have to do is leverage what you've done. You have to somehow package it appropriately, and you have to frame it so when you interview, you can say, look, this is how my experience fits into your organization. And I not only have specific domain experience, I have experience in being a person, in being a business person, or whatever industry you're in. But having that background, it carries a lot of weight. I mean, do you agree with me? So if you have got the background backed up with specialty knowledge, then you're certainly marketable.
Let me add just one thing with that. I'm also a single father with a special needs boy. I'm in the IT field as well. How does that go against me?
I'm sorry, I missed the part before
I'm
the
a
IT field.
single father of a special needs boy.
Okay.
So how does that go against me in the job market?
Well, that's a tough question. I don't know if that goes against you or goes for you.
Well, I guess it depends on the individual. I'm just
Right.
trying to get feedback. Because you know, in the IT field, sometimes you got to be available around the clock.
True. It depends. One of the things I've focused on in my career has been not so much to, like early on I recognized I didn't want to manage servers or manage a network, because those are real-time mission-critical applications that you have to be on, and they're available. And a lot of things you can do, you can reboot from your phone. Sometimes you got to hit the button, right? So yeah, I understand what you're saying. Where another area would be something like application development, which is not so timely. Where you say, or you can do something remotely. It's not so, okay, the server's down, you got to reboot it, or the network failed, you got to swap out a switch. Right. So you have to, I think, frame where your expertise is and how it fits into your lifestyle with the special needs child. And, say, look, I'm not available all the time because I have these responsibilities. And for me, I would look at that as a very creative alternative. And I would respect you because of what you do and being the parent that you are. So I would personally would not hold that against you. I would say, where can we fit you where we don't have to have you, drive immediately to be somewhere. So I would frame it that way.
Other questions from students? Well, what I'd like to ask, yes.
I have a big enough voice. With the interviewing process, I noticed that a lot of people are doing phone interviews as like the first cycle. Is that commonplace in your field as well? I just noticed when I put out an application, I get a phone interview. I know it's common with the government, but with the government, when you get a phone interview, it's usually a job offer. However, you can't convey your passion as well as you in person, as well as you do over the phone. I mean, how do you deal with phone interviews, I guess, or do you have them?
I can tell you, I have people that work for me right now that I've never met face to face. I think that the world is really changing in terms of how, the whole telecommuting. I actually run a company in Reno, Nevada, and I live in London. So I don't go there very often. I have meetings 100% of the time with the people, customers, resellers, a variety of different issues I manage, and it's all through Skype and email and telephone, and it's just a different world now. I would say if there's one thing I could tell you is that everything is on the internet now, so your public image is really important. I tell kids in college all the time, clean up your Facebook, because no matter what, people are looking at that when when your image is out there. It's very easy to see how someone really did in college by how their Facebook looks even. So, there's, everything is now open. It used to be you'd send a resume in, you might get a job interview a couple of weeks later. Now, like I said, I look for people on LinkedIn. All their profiles are online. You can do, of course, Google searches to figure out, well, did a person really graduate from college? And so everything is public. So spend the time fine-tuning your image out there. Work on your resume and make sure that you're consistent in everything that you're saying. And then I would say as well, yes, telephone interviewing is getting to be very, very big, or Skype interviewing, which is what I do, because everybody has a camera on their computer now. But it's important, like I said, no matter how you come across on the phone or what have you, just make sure you're rehearsing. Try it in front of somebody. Be prepared. One of the things that I find typically troublesome is if I interview someone and they know nothing about my company. So, I want people well prepared who are answering questions and are, and maybe taking things in their past that are directly, how they could basically improve the job by their past experiences. And it doesn't have to be, you say like a special needs child. You can relate that to a very challenging dilemma in a company and say, I had to take a very, specific problem. I managed it through, I organized it, I worked this through, and now as a result, my child is safe. I mean, to me, it doesn't matter whether or not your experience in that particular area. It can be that, I was part of a club and I organized something and we did this as a result of it. You can relate just about anything that you do directly to the job. So I would say that telephone interviewing is becoming very, very big, and like I said, companies are becoming way more multinational, way more telecommuting, and definitely way more online. You can find anything out there. So before you graduate, if there's one piece of advice, clean up your Facebooks, because no matter what, you can find links, no matter how. I mean, it's not investigative work either. It's just so easy to find out what people are really, what they're really doing.
That's
So,
most standard procedure these days. Firms are looking at Facebook pages and
Exactly,
MySpace
yeah.
pages and,
Yeah.
and trying to get some background on who they are, and not just who you say you are.
so if you're there, manning the keg and, drinking, and you got a bong on the side,
Wait,
you
I'm sorry, what's wrong-
probably
what's wrong
wanna-
with that?
You probably want to clean it up before you go out in the job market.
You don't have to point out how much information you can find about people on the internet. I think directly to answer your question, there are still some traditionalists in the HR that would advise against that. I'd have to say that 80–90% of the recruiting that we do, or the processing that we do for people who apply for jobs, the first screening is done almost exclusively by phone. Even at the executive levels, when I do recruiting directly for other executives of the company, I'll usually start with a phone, or more often a video conference sort of interview before we actually, it's a big commitment for somebody, particularly if they're out of the market, to take a couple of days off to fly in to go through the whole thing, and the video conferencing, the phone interviews. Whether or not you've got a potential candidate there. So it's just much more efficient for us and much more efficient for the people who want to be considered for a job.
I just remembered something. The last IT specialist we hired a year and a half ago had a blog. And in his cover letter, he said he had a blog. And what he talked about was exactly what I was looking for. This individual had gone through, and it wasn't, he didn't create this blog because he applied for this job at our university. He had been running this blog for a couple of years. He's very program-oriented, kind of a pseudo-hacker. But he's very knowledgeable in technologies. But he had a blog, and I read this blog, and I was blown away. And then when he came in, his personal skills put him over the top. We hired him on the spot. So that's a little too. You talk about image processing, image manufacturing. Some people might use that term, but this person had a blog, and he did a very good job at maintaining it, and it was broad enough to cover a number of different industries, but it was specific enough so it got people's attention, like myself. So I forgot to mention it earlier, but it's something you want to consider. Blogging is so easy.
Well, and everything is relative. Certainly at Webster, we would not be particularly attracted to somebody who was a hacker by profession. That's a scary thought for me right now. Not going to sleep well tonight.
You want him on your side, that's all.
Any more questions? No, then I'd like to, oh, yes, Professor Sitters.
With information systems and technology and healthcare technology be two of the faster growing disciplines. And as Jeff, you mentioned, the gray areas, I like to call them intersection opportunities. What combinations of intersection of personal skills, technology skills, people skills do you see as being growth opportunities, and what technologies might be helping to support that? And in terms of opportunities in your organizations and in general for our students, which are both juniors and seniors here, as well as some of the first years that are just getting started.
I'll give some personal thoughts. It's outside of banking, but not certainly outside of financial services. I find you referenced the healthcare industry, and at least if you think about, there are two things I was using in the classroom this morning, explaining that, banks basically buy and sell money. At its essence, it's what we do. But if you were to talk to my parents about how they looked at a bank, they would have told you that it was a place that you put money to watch it grow and to keep it safe. If you talk to my daughter, she'll tell you it's a place that she puts money to get it from point A to point B. So, there is a role that is evolving in terms of a lot of what we do is evolving into this payment space, where we are principally worried in safely getting money from one point to another, from one account to another. And I think that particularly within the healthcare industry, one of the major fundamental problems in healthcare, and I can see it as a major employer, just the mushrooming expenses that we have in providing healthcare expenses, but also in administering it. There is not, for example, in the banking where you have the MasterCard and Visa networks where we all process each other's transactions and it's seamless and this large infrastructure. Unlike European countries that the governments have invested in these networks, everything in America is left to private enterprise, and it's certainly the backing of what we do. But in the healthcare industry, as a result, you have all these independent insurance companies that really have very little collaboration. And so just in terms of the paper flow of the processing from the doctors documenting the service that was provided to making the claim and all of that, it's still very archaic, very manual, and I think that there is a real growing opportunity, and there are a number of startup companies that are trying to figure it out, how to get that network or how to better facilitate the flow and take the paper out of it entirely, so that you have the ability to have not just the providing of service, but then filing of the claims and all that automatically, so that you don't have all these cards and forms and interfaces between the companies. I don't think anyone has figured it out, but I think there's a huge opportunity that the numbers are trying to crack.
I would say, of course, coming from the media and entertainment business, I see huge opportunities in the creation of storytelling, essentially. One of the biggest issues, which we're all trying to work on from a technology standpoint, is essentially how to get movies from one end to the other. And as soon as that's really cracked, then people will want entertainment. You see it, in subways, people are watching movies, on planes and what have you. But as soon as it's readily available, then the content demand is going to get much higher. And it's a huge industry, from creation to post-production in terms of, editing and finishing a film or finishing media, to delivery. But that's not just movies. that's what everyone thinks of. It's, episodics and comedies and things, but it's not. In fact, we were recently down in the elementary, preschool area there, whatever the place was. And right in Eastern, you have a production, a post-production, and a distribution network here. You may not know it, but essentially they film the kids, they're editing films, and they're actually selling and distributing movies of children being taught, and it's being used as a learning facility and a way to teach other teachers around the country. It's an amazing process, and right here in Eastern, who would have thunk it? But on top of that, there's also a growing need. I particularly am always looking for people who really understand social networking. It's going to be a huge thing in the next 10 years, where you understand now, like marketing. Traditional marketing used to be how to create a brochure, how to create a nice picture. Now it's search engine optimization, and it's delivery of content and creation of content, knowing what social media outlets are going to be used to promote your company. So things like Twittering and and being able to promote your company on a worldwide basis on zero budget. And if people can, focus on that when you go into a company, I think that, there's a major need for it. I mean, obviously, we talked about healthcare, and with this national healthcare thing, which will eventually happen probably. I mean, the rest of the civilized world has it, so we probably have to do it in the United States, but it's going to open up huge opportunities for improving technology, managing your own health situation, being able to get information at your fingertips. And it doesn't mean that you have to be a computer expert either. It means you have to know how people, and that's why, again, back to the liberal arts thing, is understanding how people work, what they need for information, how they want to, process information. That's really an important skill to have. I would rather, by the way, hire somebody from a liberal arts background simply because they're not scientists in what they do. They understand how the future world is really going to work.
Getting back to the professor's question about, what can increase your chances. I think having broad knowledge, especially in healthcare, having broad knowledge and specific interests can really help. The industry is going to change dramatically. In 2014, every clinical operation will be required to have electronic medical records, and our electronic medical records will be in a location, whether it's Hartford Hospital, your regional clinic, the Mayo Clinic, wherever it is. And you might have multiple ones. One of the big challenges that's going to be coming for this industry, for the healthcare, is going to be staffing health information technology workers. The Department of Labor forecasts 40,000 people are needed. 40,000 more people are going to be needed to help implement these technologies that are going to be required by law. And then they have this metric called meaningful use. That means you just don't put in an electronic medical record in your office. You have to actually show you're using it through use of demographics, clinical support systems, computerized patient order entry, and a number of other, which is still actually being debated right now. So we have a lot of work to do. And then if you get even to the next level of things like the semantic web you talk about, we have a lot of free-form text in healthcare. It's one thing to say you have certain codes like CPT codes for billing and ICD-9 codes for diagnosis, but you have a whole other thing that's called free text. The trouble with free text is that it's not interpreted properly. So in the world of semantics, Web 3.0, if you will, are computer applications, decision support systems that can then ascertain how this data can be translated into a metric that can be plotted, that can be brought into the cloud, that can be reported to public health, Centers for Disease Control. This morning I was speaking to a data mining class, and we talked about some of the issues that are going to be faced with this interoperability issue, with 200 plus organizations right now creating medical records all in their own semi-proprietary format. They have to interact with each other, and this is going to happen in the cloud. And it's going to be, we have to figure out how to create a unique healthcare ID for people, and once we do that, we can start exchanging data back and forth. There's going to be a lot of opportunity in healthcare. It's a huge industry. It's the biggest industry in our country, consuming 18% of our gross domestic product right now. Forecast to hit 20% by 2013. And then it should start going down again, because we'll be much more efficient about how we deliver healthcare, because we'll have data. So, back to your question earlier, how can you frame yourself, if you pose yourself to be a much better opportunity to get a job in healthcare technology in particular, that I would say that broad knowledge with specific application, and look at the opportunities. Subscribe to a news service, get on a mailing list, look at what's coming down the pike, start reading between the lines, because there's a lot of not clear information out there. So you need to distill that down into what's going to be appropriate for someone like yourself. To say, where are my opportunities? What's going to happen in the next year, 18 months? And how can I take what I know now and get to where I need to be and in a favorable position? It gets back to the 110% thing. Just don't sit there and wait for something to come to you because you're given 100%. You need 110% or more. And use the tools out there to help you do that.
Well, thank you very much. I think it's wonderful not only for our students to hear from you, but also for administrators. I learned something very important which is that we need to be providing training for students in how to do Skype interviews through our career services. And it just never occurred to me. And maybe they're doing some of that, but I haven't heard much about that. So I've certainly learned a lot. I also, before I thank our 2010 Eastern Fellows, I want to thank the staff from Institutional Advancement and Alumni Affairs, Ken DeLisa, Peter Dane, Joe McGann, and Michael Stenko, for putting together the program. It takes a lot of work to bring together people who live very busy lives. So to coordinate getting all three of them here at the same day, and getting venues for them, getting class meetings. It takes a lot of effort, so I'd like to thank them very much for that. But most, I'd like to thank our 2010 Eastern Fellows. You provided us with wonderful information. I hope you've inspired students and you've motivated them. I think they'll all go forward into their job interviews with more passion than they had intended to before. So thank you very much. I have some little gifts to give you. Thank you very much.
I want to let you know that I still have my 1979 Eastern sweatshirt packed away. So
Well, that's wonderful.
I
And
can finally wear one.
so I hope that some of you consider the fact that in 30 years you might be sitting up here with somebody who's sitting next to you now, a classmate. Keep the t-shirt, the sweatshirt that you have now. We'll give you another one in 30 years. But thanks very much again to the fellows, and thanks for all of you coming.
Thank you. Thank you.